Family Meal at Blue Hill has to be one of the most interesting Michelin-starred restaurants in New York City. The establishment has an intense focus on sourcing local ingredients and doesn't even have a menu, thus they serve a variety of shared plates for $145. To put it simply, I just had to give Family Meal at Blue Hill a try. Today I'm here in New York City at Washington Square Park, and it is a beautiful but somewhat rainy evening. However, I would like to talk about the dinner I had earlier at a Michelin-starred restaurant called Family Meal at Blue Hill. Now, this restaurant has intrigued me for a number of reasons. One, it has a Michelin star, and I want to go to every single Michelin-starred restaurant, so there's that. The other reason is their menu. Frankly, it's a bit different than the typical Michelin-starred restaurant. It's kind of like a tasting menu, except with each round of courses you get multiple dishes within that particular course. I was also intrigued by the restaurant's price. Their menu goes for $145, and for a New York City Michelin-starred restaurant, that's not that bad. In addition, the restaurant comes from chef Dan Barber, and he is pretty much a legend. As a result, I felt like this week would be a great week to give Family Meal at Blue Hill a try. So with that being said, this was my dinner. Family Meal at Blue Hill is located in Greenwich Village, right near Washington Square Park. The restaurant was established in the year 2000, but at the time it was simply known as Blue Hill. The Family Meal concept came about in 2021 as a response to the pandemic. Even with the change of concept, the restaurant still maintained their Michelin star, which they've held for years. The name Family Meal refers to the shared meal consumed by a restaurant's staff before a shift. Blue Hill is the product of chef Dan Barber, who has received numerous awards and accolades, including multiple James Beard Awards. In 2009, Time magazine even named Barber as one of the world's most influential people in their annual Time 100. Barber is perhaps most well known for his other restaurant, the 2 Michelin-starred Blue Hill at Stone Barns, which is located north of New York City in Tarrytown. That is a bucket list restaurant for me, but for the moment I was incredibly excited to dine at Family Meal at Blue Hill. As a result, I arrived to the restaurant at 5:30 on a Thursday night for my reservation. After checking in, I was seated at the bar. Once I was settled, I was able to take in the space. Blue Hill is a nice looking spot. The narrow dining room is low lit and elegant, but still comfortable. Overall, I thought that the restaurant had a great feel to it. It was still clearly a fine dining establishment, but one that was a bit more laid back. In fact, I think that the dress code encapsulates the atmosphere quite well, as it merely encourages guests to dress as they would for dinner at a friend's house. Next, I checked out the beverage offerings. Now normally, I would decide on what I wanted to eat first, but Family Meal has no menu. Everyone will pretty much be eating the same thing. This was made apparent during the reservation process, as the dinner menu will set one back $145. Although, the restaurant also offers a shorter weekend lunch for $85, which sounds like a good deal. In terms of drinks, Family Meal does offer a beverage pairing for $95. There's also cocktails, mocktails, beer, and cider, but I was leaning towards wine by the glass. I decided to go with a glass of the 2024 Hexamar Riesling. That proved to be a very pleasant wine. The off-dry style equated to a wine that paired easily with a variety of food. I really enjoyed it. While I was drinking, my bartender presented me with a sort of roadmap of how my dinner would unfold.
This is a little guide for us this evening.
Oh, okay.
Walking us through the 4 courses you'll see as part of the tasting.
Oh, okay, yeah. All of the courses that I would be enjoying that evening were listed so I could follow along throughout my meal. There was also a map showcasing the farms and suppliers the restaurant sources their ingredients from. Yeah, Blue Hill takes locality and seasonality very seriously. Soon enough, it was time for the first course. It was a simple gazpacho consisting of sun-gold tomatoes, white nectarines, and lemon verbena. That proved to be a delightful, cool, and refreshing soup. The tomato flavor was nicely balanced, but it was complemented well with the lemon verbena and white nectarines. After finishing, I was presented with a plethora of plates. I was told there was no real order I should follow when eating them, so I just dove right in. The first dish I tried was the most simple of the selection. It was just a bowl of sliced and salted cucumbers. However, there were multiple varieties of cucumbers within that bowl. Because of that, I really got to appreciate just how different and unique cucumbers can be from one another. Plus, that bowl served as somewhat of a palate cleanser to the other creations before me. I next tried the corn and crab fritters, and they were fantastic. Those warm fritters were perfectly fried and nicely stuffed with crab. Now, they were excellent on their own, but they paired beautifully with the sweet peach sauce they were presented with. Next, I gave the eggplant a try. Now, this is where my brain apparently took a break. You see, I was supposed to add the eggplant to the bread. However, I ate both separately. Now, I'm sure they would have gone great together, but even on their own, they were delicious. The eggplant contained gemelli maizena and tahini. Gemelli maizena is actually a new sweet pepper variety that's been bred in collaboration with Cornell University. In fact, throughout my meal, I would be presented with a number of unique varieties of vegetables that I simply wasn't aware of. Regarding the eggplant, it was incredible. The smokiness and richness of that mixture was amazing and probably would have been perfect on the bread, which I tried next. Even on its own, that bread was very tasty. It had a wonderful fluffiness to it as well as a crisp crust. Now, at the time, I did think it was a bit strange that it didn't come with either butter or olive oil, but like I said, my brain was on a break. Nevertheless, that first round of food was excellent. Next was a pretty crazy surprise as I turned and saw a fish hanging on a hook right next to me. It turns out that was a preview of an upcoming course. In the meantime, I was presented with 2 more dishes and they each looked promising. I first turned my attention to the tuna course, which consisted of husked cherries, watermelon, and tropea onions. The tuna on its own was tender and tasty, but it was the other elements that really took that dish to the next level. There was both a sweetness and a richness to the course that complemented the fish so well. Plus, all those other components added some great textural variation. To put it simply, that was a hell of a dish. Then I turned my attention to the mackerel, which contains celtas, blueberries, and Verono beets. It was a sharp-looking creation indeed, so I eagerly dove right in. That mackerel was wonderful. It truly ended up being a fine dish to pair with the tuna. The mackerel was strongly seasoned and had a firmness to it, which was a nice contrast to the soft tuna. Overall, that dish was another winner. Plus, I loved the bold color provided by the beets and blueberries. After finishing, it was on to 2 more seafood courses. The first was rainbow trout with heirloom tomatoes and what the restaurant calls upstate abundance, which is probably referring to the greens in the bowl. First, I took a bite of one of the tomatoes, which was ridiculously good. The tomatoes were so juicy and their flavor was so potent. I'm not exaggerating, but those tomatoes were the highlight of the dish, and that's saying something because that trout was incredible as well. It was perfectly cooked and it had a nice, satisfying skin. Out of all the courses I had that evening, that was one of my favorites. Although the dish it was paired with was no slouch either. It was tilefish with tetra squash, nasturtium, and whelk. I was particularly curious about that creation, especially since it contained some fascinating ingredients. I found the course to be quite interesting and had a surprising texture that I wasn't expecting. Once again, however, I was very satisfied. So far my dinner was progressing nicely. After finishing, I was presented with some of the ingredients that will be used in the next course. I really appreciated that, as I not only learned a lot, but it also increased my excitement for the upcoming courses. Although, since I was presented with that fish earlier and I knew a pork dish was coming up, I was curious if someone would haul a pig carcass up to the bar. Thankfully, it was just the vegetables that I was presented with. Soon enough, however, I received the final savory courses of the meal and they all looked good. First, I turned my attention to a dish that had a truly fascinating combination of ingredients. There were Romano beans, strawberries, and a bit of anchovies. Yeah, I don't recall ever having a dish quite like that before, but I was excited to dig in. Despite the odd mix of components, that was a tasty dish that strangely worked. The Romano beans were nicely cooked, the strawberries provided a pleasant level of sweetness, and the anchovies lent a subtle funkiness. That was a good side dish, but I soon turned my attention to the main course, which was pork from Climbing Tree Farm up in New Lebanon, New York. Besides the meat, there were also experimental peas, which I learned about earlier, corn, and okra. The dish had an appetizing, rustic look to it, which I couldn't wait to try. That was a tasty piece of pork indeed. It was hearty, flavorful, and cooked just right. Although I did think it was a bit chewy at points, it was nevertheless a satisfying dish. Plus, all of the other components that accompanied the pork paired well with the meat. I was happy. Next, I turned my attention to the salad, which contained red oak lettuce, fennel, and hazelnuts. That salad was very nice. It was simple, but tasty. It had the right amount of dressing and a nice pop of sweetness from the fruit. Plus, I've gotta say, I think I appreciated that salad even more than I usually would. For the past few weeks, the US was dealing with the Cyclospora outbreak, and while I wasn't too concerned about it, the situation provided an all too convenient excuse to eat more meat and pasta than I should have. So having that salad was a welcome change of pace. After finishing those 3 plates, it was on to dessert. First up was a sort of palate cleanser consisting of 2 bites of watermelon. One was seasoned with shiso, and the other was seasoned with something that had a bit of spice, but I can't recall exactly what it was. Nevertheless, both of those bites were vibrant, refreshing, and tasty. Finally, I was presented with my last round of food, which consisted of 3 more plates. One was a fig ice cream that was actually meant to be consumed together with the accompanying plate consisting of sugar plum and a fig pudding. First, I tried the ice cream separately, which was delightful. The fig flavor was on the mark. Then I turned to the sugar plum, which cracked open nicely. Combined with the pudding, it equated to be a truly spectacular dessert. Having that ice cream on the side just took everything to the next level. That dessert, hands down, was one of the highlights of my dinner. Sadly, I was on to the last plate of my meal, which consisted of what appeared to be some chocolate-dusted bites that sort of looked like dog food to me. However, if dog food tastes like that, then I need to stop at Petco ASAP, because those bites were delicious. Finally, I sampled the cookie on the plate, which was soft, tasty, and a delightful ending to a great meal. After finishing, it was time for the bill, which totaled to $177.47, but with my tip, I spent a bit over $210. So that was delicious. Overall, I had an excellent dinner and I'm incredibly happy. First off, all of the food I had was incredible, but the thing that I really liked and the thing that will probably stick with me was the format of the meal. I felt like it was a refreshing change up from the typical Michelin Star tasting menu. I really liked going back and forth between multiple plates, just getting all those different flavors and textures. It was a lot of fun. Of course, that sort of menu format is nothing new. The fact is, you just don't see it as much. My dinner really reminded me of when I was at Sean Brock's restaurant, Audrey in Nashville, where for each course, I was also served multiple plates, and that was an excellent meal. Now, coming back to tonight's dinner, one of the other things that I really appreciated was just how passionate the staff was about, frankly, everything. When it came to the food, they were just so knowledgeable and passionate, and that passion sort of rubbed off on me. It made me even more excited than I already was to try the food. I mean, I not only got a meal tonight, I also got an education. I felt like I learned a lot. But the most important thing that I learned is that family meal at Blue Hill is a fine restaurant. The food was excellent, the service and hospitality were excellent, and the place just had a really nice atmosphere. Plus, I really felt like I got my money's worth. I got a good amount of food. I am not hungry by any means, although I'm not stuffed, but in comparison to other Michelin-starred restaurants out there, it's definitely one of the better ones, at least in terms of the amount of food you are served. To sum it up, I had an excellent meal tonight and an overall great experience at Family Meal at Blue Hill. One day I will definitely go to Blue Hill at Stone Barns, but until then, I am very pleased with my experience tonight at Family Meal at Blue Hill. Without a doubt, I will return.